and then I'll probably just leave it mute. Everyone, we begin today by acknowledging that the land we gather on is the traditional unceded territory of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. We honor with gratitude this land and the Indigenous people who have stewarded it throughout generations. To those here in person and joining us via live stream, welcome to the Women's Leadership in Gender Equity in Law and Medicine panel. It is an honor to be here today. I am Sariah Bolden, a Roosevelt Honors student majoring in History and Political Science. I am also a Joint Deutsch Herczeg Women's Leadership Scholar. This afternoon's American Dream Reconsidered Conference event is sponsored by the Roosevelt Women Leadership Council. The council supports and unites women alumni, students, and friends of the university. They organize opportunities like today's discussion that empower women leaders to make positive change towards gender equity, equality, and inclusion. As a Herczeg scholar, I am proud to be a part of the council. Many strides have been made in sex and gender equity. However, the journey still remains unfinished. Today's discussion is between two inspiring women leaders in law and medicine, both of whom have worked to advance women's equity and equality. They will discuss where we have been and where we should go from here. Now I'd like to welcome my fellow scholar, Maria Rivera, who will introduce our esteemed panel. Maria is majoring in finance and is also an honors student.
Thank you, Sariah. It truly is a pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to introduce our remarkable panel. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Andie Kramer. Dr. Kramer is a partner at international law firm McDermott Will Emery, LLP. Alongside her demanding legal career, she has become a nationally known advocate for women advancement. Because mentorship opportunities for young executive and professional women are often limited, she co-founded the Women Leadership and Mentoring Alliance and has co-founded the Women Leadership and Mentoring Alliance and has developed many women leadership training programs. Andie has a long list of accolades and awards for both her legal career and her advocacy for women. Among her accolades is her inclusion on National Law Review, 50 Most Influential Women Lawyers in America, for her demonstrated power to change the legal landscape, shape public affairs, launch industries, and do big things. She is also the co-author with her husband, Al Harris, of Breaking Through Bias, Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work. Their second book is Not You, It's the Workplace, Women's Conflict at Work and the Bias That Built. It was published in 2019. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Neelum Aggarwal. Dr. Neelum Aggarwal is a cognitive neurologist, clinical trialist, researcher, and associate professor at Rush University Medical Center. She is the senior examining neurologist for the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Central Clinical Core in the Cardiology Cognitive Clinic at the Rush Heart Center for Women, where she also serves as the center research director. Dr. Aggarwal has served in many leadership roles throughout her career. She is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the American Medical Women Association, a member of the Governing Council of the American Medical Association, Women's Physician Section, a fellow of the Institute of the Medicine Chicago, and was awarded the 2016 Women in Science Award from the American Medical Women Association. She is a member of many professional organizations and an active member of the American Heart Association and Go Red for Women movement, serving on the steering committee for Chicago Go Red STEAM initiative. Lastly, moderating today's panel is Dr. Cami McBride, Dean of the College of Arts and Science at Roosevelt University. Dean McBride has taught in the psychology department at Roosevelt since 2006. She is an expert in adolescent development, family therapy, and developmental psychopathology. Thank you all for being here today. Dean McBride, I will turn it over to you to begin the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sariah and Maria, for that great introduction. I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you again to the Women's Leadership Council for putting together this event. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's get going with the questions. We have a lot to talk about. One of the earlier panels threatened to be 6 hours. I think we might go a little bit longer. So I'd like to start with Andie. But both of you have spoken and written about bias for some time, gender bias for a while. What got you started in this area? How did you get started on this road?
Well, not to make it a 6-hour explanation, I'll make it fairly quick, which is that when I got out of law school, I started at a little tiny law firm where they couldn't have cared if you were purple polka dotted. If you did a good job, everybody wanted you on their team. And I left there after 13 years and went to a huge firm where people don't know you and stereotypes and biases then take over their perceptions. And what I found was that people couldn't understand what that woman was doing in that corner office, couldn't understand when I said that I was a mother of a small child, couldn't understand, well, I would ask you to do this if you'll still be around. And so I realized fairly quickly that the experience that I had started with was not the experience that everybody else has, and was far enough along in my career and strong enough willed that I started to speak and write about the things that needed to change in the workplace.
Thanks. I've enjoyed your book quite a bit.
Thank you.
Neelum, how about you? How did you get started in this area?
I was just listening to Andie. I want everyone to now do a switch over to medicine. I'm trained as a physician. And let's switch over here, which he was just saying. The same things were happening in medicine. So although we were in medical school and we were going through the training, and once we got on the floors, you started to see the same kind of pattern of behavior where if you were in a room and you were now the medical student as the M3, or we call her M4, and you'd be next to your male colleague, the patients, families may ask the male colleague, what do you think when you're the medical student assigned to that patient? And to make it worse, the attendings or your residents who are above you, who are mentoring you, the same thing was happening to them. And we would see that. It was interesting, Andie, because we would see that, but you never kind of understood what was going on because you're so busy just making sure you got the right diagnosis and you did it right, and you did it right.
And you think it's just you.
Well, that's it. And you're thinking, well, maybe I'm not sitting up, I'm not more in there, or I'm not presenting myself. And you just really, at the time, you just didn't know with it, so you kind of go with it. And then it kept permeating through everywhere you went. So even now, if you come in, and if I come in, and I can tell you right now, if I come in with a male colleague and I'm talking about something, the eyes will go to the male colleague as the attending in charge at times. And Andie and I talked about it, and that's why we're here. We're having two different sectors. We want to talk about these things, but this isn't just one sector. This is happening throughout. And I'm sure if we had a business colleague here, they'd say the same thing. And an IT colleague would say the same thing. But to raise awareness that it's happening at a very young stage already in training, and we should be aware of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have made some progress, but certainly not enough.
Yeah.
Not enough.
No.
That'll lead us to eventually, when I assume you're going to ask us,
I'm out of a job
what
already.
what can be, I'm speculating as to what can be done.
Right.
Yes, we will definitely get to that. Before we get to that, though, what do you think is behind sort of gender bias, gender inequality, and how do we? You've given some great examples, but how else is it manifested? I will say in academia, it happens as well.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Oh.
I'll start if
Yep.
Neelum, if that's okay.
Yep.
We're old friends, so
We tag team.
we can, won't be a problem. It turns out that when I joined that big law firm, I was on the management committee and then the compensation committee. And what I found on the compensation committee was that the women would write these self-evaluations. I was on the ABC team and I worked with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and we saved the client $1 zillion. And the guys who were on that team, even if she was the one who had come up with the idea that saved the client all the money, would say, I am a total rock star. And I single-handedly climbed to the top of the Willis Tower, spun around, identified all the damsels in distress. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm like going, oh my goodness. And so I started doing self-evaluation do's and don'ts to sort of say, hey, and what I learned with starting the research and working on the books that I have in the area is that as little girls we're told, don't get your dress dirty, don't tear your tights, be a good girl. And boys are not told, don't get your pants dirty, don't get your hands dirty. And boys will be boys. And so by the time we're 3 or 4 years old, it turns out that girls are socialized to the point that they've got studies where if you give a girl a gift that you know she's going to hate, and she's 4 years old, she will struggle to say thank you and come up with a reason as to why it's a nice gift. And a boy, same age, will say, well, this is a dumb gift. I don't want this. And so what happens is we get to the point where we think we're supposed to behave in a certain way. And the woman who was writing her self-evaluation saying, I was part of the ABC team, what she was doing is she was modeling the stereotypes of you can't be a braggart, you can't be you've got to be modest, you have to be a team player, and all of these things. And so the research pans all of that out. Yep. So part of it is socialization, and the other part of it is that women see it happening and think, well, it's just me. Maybe I did something wrong. Right. And so there's information becomes very important to understand that you're not alone, and that it's not you. Right. Right. And the other part of it is that men need to understand that there's an issue. And when the surveys are done, 90% of women, 80 to 90% of women will say, I've had an experience that's been biased, gender bias in the workplace, and 20% of the men think that that's the case. So if not, the delta there between 80, 90% and 20, 30% tells you that there's a disconnect.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with what you're saying. We get socialized very young about how to behave, what's expected from us and what's not expected. And if you do a certain behavior that's not in line, you get penalized for it. The other thing that strikes me in medicine, I get asked to write letters of recommendation. And working with Andie and, again, colleagues outside of medicine, I'm going to say, they've really taught me to pay attention to the kind of words that I use to describe a candidate. Okay? And I'm very particular now on being, I'm going to say, product focused, what they've added to the team, collegial, hardworking, pitches in. That's not something that I'm going to be putting in the letter as the high point. I'm putting in what I call the metrics and the structural metrics that I know are important. And, they're important for men and they're important for women, but they're even more important for women. And so what I've had to do, and again, Andie, you and I working together, is to raise awareness that it's not you, but also raise awareness of how the system is and how you now also just need to understand that there are certain metrics that we want to have noted, and what you can do to get those metrics by still being you, but realizing that it has to be there. So we're doing a lot of educating about this, but I've been very mindful, and I'm teaching my even younger residents and younger colleagues why I am writing these types of letters, why I'm doing this, so that they are intentional, knowing that this is a really important issue and we need to change that.
Neelum's made a really good example for students, because you're going to have all sorts of situations where you're supposed to be advancing yourself to get into another school, to get a clerkship, to get a resident, whatever. And they want references from your senior people who can, and the problem is that the studies are endless about how the women's evaluations are shorter than the men's. They talk about the things that Neelum said about she's collegial, she's a team player, but by the end of reading it, you think he's the rock star, as evidenced by the self-evaluations that I read, and she would be great in the library committee.
Or she's supporting him as the rock star.
Right.
Okay,
She's
she's in the supportive role.
So when you're going to need one of those references or one of those letters, don't just say, I need a letter. Work with whoever is going to be writing that letter for you to be certain that they know exactly what you've done, exactly what the requirements are, how you fit those requirements, so you can get a reference like Neelum works at to make certain that she's talking about your core competencies and not you're a nice person.
So, essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to minimize that bias that exists, right? So we know it exists. And I think this is the other thing. We have to really be real about this. It's there. Okay, it's there. So the question is eliminating what Andie and I talk about, what are we going to do? But you also want to minimize that bias. So if you're able to give, let's say in this example, give me that information, you're helping me minimize that bias when that application and that letter comes to the desk. Now, other things we've done, Andie, you and I have talked about the Great Orchestra example, which I don't know if many of you've heard about that, but I think it's worth repeating what happened in our orchestra. So did you want to?
Sure. In the late 60s, 70s, all of the very big symphony orchestras were men, white men. And there was a music critic who said, I can tell the difference when a woman plays an instrument and when a man plays the instrument.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's actually how this stuff started.
Yeah.
And so they put behind the screen, and he couldn't tell anybody who did what.
So the audition was behind the screen.
The audition was behind the screen.
And then the person trotted out. And
women would take their shoes off so that they couldn't hear the little shoes clipping.
That's exactly it, right? Because you could also, I'm a neurologist, so here comes some neurology. We can also figure out the gait, how you're walking, the steps, how heavy is the step? Maybe, a male walking versus a female walking. So you're right, the shoes came off. It was got to be.
And the major symphony orchestras are almost 50-50 now.
Right.
And people of color are in there too.
Exactly. So if you think about it for academia, right, when you think about applications, it should be stripped of anything, really. Right. Think about an application coming through. Wouldn't it be great if it was completely stripped of everything? Just look at the application on the merit of the application.
Yeah, Andie, would you mention that study I think you cited in your book where they presented people who would be likely to hire?
The Jane and John.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. And you've got the book, everybody. So the Breaking Through Bias.
So look it up.
Look it up. Yeah, read it.
Look it up.
She's not selling anymore. You already have it.
You already got it. Right. Just read it. What happens is that they've done all of these studies where they have the exact same resume, and they put a guy's name on it and a woman's name on it, and they send it out. And the one that that you're referring to is for a lab technician so this is in the science field. So for a lab, somebody to do lab stuff. And the resumes are exactly the same resume. They made this fake resume up. John and Jane, they send these out. Male and female professors, doctors, people who would selected the man over the woman, like dramatically more. And when they asked them how much compensation they should get, they put the men down for more compensation than the woman. And they said, and how much mentorship would you be willing to give this person? And they put down that they would be giving more to the men.
Yeah.
And these same studies have been done where you take a name, a plain vanilla name like John, and you take a name that's got ethnic connections to it. And miraculously, the plain vanilla name gets the callback or the invitation over and over again. So we have to think about ways that we can help ourselves by thinking about, do we want to have a resume, for example, or a bio, which starts with, I'm the mother of 2 small children. No. I would recommend that not be. No, don't do that. Now, you're very proud of it, and you should be, and I'm not suggesting that you're supposed to hide it, but the reality is you want to get your foot in the door so that you can have that kind of conversation where you can sell yourself.
Right. You mentioned the difference in compensation. So I have a question about that. So there's lots of examples of these inequities, gender inequities, from NASA not having spacesuits for astronauts who were women,
right,
or professional athletes.
I mean,
who were
really,
women.
honestly, we have to stop right there. Really. Really?
Actually, we just did a workshop for NASA, so hopefully they're going to get their acts together.
But I mean, when that's
but they do have a new spacesuit for women. They have now fixed that.
It's
okay.
probably about time.
Right.
So,
Yeah, think about that.
So what do these sort of, the impact of these inequities, what are they on for women who are already in careers, or for younger women who are just beginning, when they see, women athletes not being paid, women astronauts not able to get a spacesuit? We could go on and on.
It's sort of the death by 1,000 cuts situation.
Right.
And so one of the things that I think is really very important, and I know Neelum does we talk a lot about mentoring and supporting women as they're working their ways up in their careers. And first of all, if you're the person who's in that situation, a young woman in school working her way up in her career, part of it is you have to think about what you can do to deal with biased people. And that's really what Breaking Through Bias is about, the book, which we divided into 2 parts. One part is conversations with yourself about being confident, about being able in resilient and being able in difficult situations to step back and get perspective. And the other part of it is conversations with other people. That's a key part of what we can do for ourselves. What Neelum is talking about, saying, here I am, I'm the person who's writing these references and these letters. She knows that she needs to break through that bias to make it clear that the women are as competent as the men. So that's one more thing that women can do to be sure that they get a fair shake.
And sponsor. Right?
And sponsor.
And sponsoring. So, Andie and I talk about mentoring and sponsoring. And there's a big difference here. And where you're at, you have that, you're in the mentoring role. And to an extent, we all are, right? We're all being mentored.
Sure.
But we don't make the leap to sponsorship as quickly as we should. Okay? And sponsor, like right today, Andie has sponsored me to be here. I wouldn't have met you and all of you coming here today. Not in my network. So this is a sponsorship activity here coming from Andie, who was my mentor. And I really want to stay on this point for a moment, because what I've noticed and what I've seen over and over and over again, and again, for the men in the audience, this is not a slight to you at all. This is an awareness, just raising awareness. Men sponsor much more quickly and effectively than women do. I see it all the time. It happens in the hallways, it happens in the boardrooms, it happens in the classrooms, it happens on the golf course, it happens everywhere. And women, we don't do that as quickly.
But we don't for reasons, which is that very often, because of the stereotypes and the biases, we're afraid of sort of making a mistake. So we get kind of sort of held back, and the guy will make a flyer on some young person or whatever, and it's harder for women. There's also all sorts of other stereotypes and biases that come into play there, but that holds us back. And
for that
so
equality issue, what you're talking about, it see how it all weaves in? It holds you back then for earning potential.
Or stereotype threat.
Right.
The
Yes,
idea
exactly.
that the fear that women, and this has applied for other characteristics as well, the fear that you're going to act like the stereotype,
right,
which
or
then
fail.
interferes with your ability to perform well. It's sort of a,
Right, but the other piece is if we don't do that, then this term critical mass, you don't have critical mass. But once you have critical mass, what are you doing with it?
You gotta
What are
promote
you
people.
doing with it? Okay, you've got critical mass. It's fabulous. I love it when I see it in these committees. Okay, hello, how are we thinking ahead and moving? And we don't see that, Andie, as quickly as we should. And that's why we're here to say you have to start young with this and you have to get used to it. You got to sit in it. You have to marinate in this and think about, what can I do now? I'm being mentored, but what can I sponsor someone? And then you step back and let that person do what they need to do. And that's how we're going to have to think about this.
To make another pitch that I wasn't planning on, but seems appropriate here, is that one of the things that I co-founded is the Women's Leadership and Mentoring Alliance, WILMA. And what we've started is we're doing, working with my husband and I on our book stuff, and together we're doing mentorship pairs where we handpick the mentors and mentees, and we are doing students. And so we're doing rolling pairs now. And so that might be something, because it sounds great to say, oh, you need a mentor, you need a sponsor. Well, where are you going to find one? Chances are you know some, you just don't think of them in that way. And so that's part of it. But the other part of it is that there are organizations like Wilma that people can, that women in particular can be part of to help advance in your career.
But I think, the question, if we can get back to the pay inequality or just that, because it's a really important issue, and how do you frame it, right? Something like that, because it's such a big issue. So Andie, when we talk about, men being offered more than women, we see it in medicine. And you're going to say, how can that be? In medicine, you guys are the same, right? You go through medical school and then you go to residency. Oh no. There is, after residency, the first job out, men are getting consistently higher offering. Now, again, same program, right?
Right.
Same
So
residency, same program.
And she might have done a hell of a lot better.
Right, exactly.
Right?
And so you're seeing it happening here, but I just want to stay on the medical piece. The impact of constantly being behind, starting like that, you may never really catch up, number one. And number two, if you just want to talk medical, women tend to live longer than men. Okay, I want you to think about this, live longer than men. As when you live longer, we all want to be healthy and we all want to be vibrant as we get older, but that's not necessarily happening. You're having medical issues and conditions accrue. And actually, Andie, I'm talking about this at one of the law. We did an event together about elder law, and we were a women's event. And I put that, I still remember putting that slide together.
I remember that one.
Remember that slide, Andie? It was age, you're living longer. And yet, if you're behind already in working, women leave the workforce at times in their lifespan for various reasons. They try to do a reentry, but when the reentry occurs, they're coming in at a lower level, let's say in pay. Medical conditions accrue and start to stack up. There could be, then we have the child rearing issues and childcare, which we all know is just a big issue about who's taking care of children and it's affordable. Then when there is a death of a spouse, we know that men marry faster and more often than women do. So now you have a woman who is a widow, and who's taking care of her? And all along this, where are the finances going here? So the result, I hate to say, is that more women end up in poverty than men. That's how, if you just put it through the big old trajectory, this is how it's panning out. And we have to raise that awareness, the long-term perspective on this, not just the short term. There are these long-term pieces that we have to think about.
So not to be Debbie Downer here.
Yeah, but not to be. Go to it, Andie.
But what I will say is that, Neelum, you're absolutely right. But there are things that we can all do to try to solve some of these problems.
Exactly.
So, for example, when the residents get out of school and they get their first jobs, the women ought to have done their research to find out what's the going rate.
Exactly.
And if they're told, we'll give you X, but she knows X plus 12 is what the going rate is for guys, then she has an obligation to say something about it.
Exactly.
And when you're in your career and you find that a man is making more than you are because they believe he has the family or whatever, they think somehow, whatever they think.
The mortgage.
The
He has to
whatever.
pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
But what happens is a friend of mine who is an investment banker has the greatest response that she has when she talks to these women working their way up. And the woman will say, okay, I know that he got more than I did, and I know that isn't really fair, but it doesn't really matter. And she says, okay, so let me see now, when it's time to send your kids to college, you'll just send the bill to him and he'll pay the college bill. Oh, I understand now. Well, obviously that's not going to happen. And they then realize that they have an obligation to themselves and to their families to do something, to not let it just.
I think the other thing is transparency too. There's a big issue about transparency, about what is the going rate, what is that. Oh, we don't want to disclose salaries. And, I would beg to differ to an extent. How do you even know what to go for then if you don't have an accurate benchmark? Okay. And I think this is that tug of war where it is. But on the other hand, it's really not fair to say somebody to go ask for something when you have absolutely no information coming to you in any accessible way, in a transparent way of what it is.
Right.
And I think ranges are good. I think ranges are fair. But to say, well, we can't disclose that, we can't disclose that, we can't disclose that, how is that factoring in?
Well, there's efforts to get rid of the non-compete and the anti, confidentiality stuff.
Right.
And there's some moves to make certain that if you started out behind and you're going to a new job and they say to you, well, what are you making now?
Right.
Well, then we'll match you plus 2, and you're now 24 behind, whatever, So those are the kind of things that we can do.
I wanted to, in that theme, but broadening it a little bit, how does gender interact with other identities or characteristics that can influence what happens in the workplace? I'm talking about intersectionality. Right. The idea that because of different social categories that people it creates overlapping, this is a dictionary definition, overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
As a white woman, I probably should have Neelum as a Indian woman, Indian American woman, talk about it. So you start and I'll mop up.
So it's a complicated topic because, as you just said, intersectionality, everything is weaving into everything else. And I think gender roles are really important. Again, just a basic definition, sex and gender are not the same thing. Okay. Sex, a biological construct, if you will, and gender is a social construct. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So from a gender perspective, if you just want to even bring in some of the roles you have from race, ethnicity, there are certain norms that you do and certain norms that you've been raised with and culturally that you try to understand. How does that fit into where I'm at? Okay, and I think one thing in Andie's second book, particularly Andie,
Yeah, it's not, it's the workplace.
right? The workplace is an issue where it may not be comfortable with certain gender roles in itself, and yet you're there all the time, and you're trying to figure out, how do I fit in with how I've been culturally raised and my personalities? And there's this one area, I remember we were talking about this, Asian culture, you tend to keep your nose to the grindstone, you're quiet, you don't speak up, okay? Now, again, this is not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just that there's a certain permeating kind of overlay on how your personality is. If you are now in a situation where it is speak up, and just go, 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 you can see already what's happening from a gender perspective and a cultural perspective, that you may not be fitting in that mold.
And so from the side of there's the two sides of this. One is the person and their intersectionality. The other question then is how they're interacting with other people and how other people perceive them.
Right.
And in Neelum's example, there may be some pressure for her to not be hurry up, talk, because that's not what she grew up with. But from the side of who she's interacting with, if she comes out and she says, you do this and you do that and you do this and we're meeting in an hour, everybody's hair catches fire. Who does she think she is? The men and the women. And so that's an issue that we have to deal with as well,
And we also have to recognize, so here's the thing, but recognize it yourself, that if you have a team member who is from the same background and you know what you know, you may want to call on them one-on-one and say, we need to hear your voice, we need to hear your opinion on this, instead of saying you have to conform to this. That's how we can get better. And that's how you have an inclusive workforce, where you know that there may be some of these norms, and I'm not saying everybody, but there are some of these general norms, and you may want to say, I'm going to go in there and ask you.
The Supreme Court, with this term, just did something dramatically different, because of what they found was that studies were done which showed that the female justices were interrupted more by the male justices, and the male lawyers were interrupting them.
This is the Supreme Court. I mean, I'm just smiling here. This is the Supreme Court, right?
This is hot news. It was last couple weeks ago.
Sotomayor.
Yes, and so what happened is the policy was, it was a free-for-all. Everybody would just ask questions. So the ones who were the loudest or the most persistent were the ones who got their questions out, and they would step on the women mostly, because the women were trained to not get their dress dirty and not tear their tights. And so what happened is they've changed the policy so that the justices have a question or a time period by seniority, and then it gets opened up so that they make certain that everybody, that's Neelum's point, which is you don't want to go into a meeting and just have the meeting leader sit there and have the half of the meeting of women not being able to get a word in edgewise. And so there are all sorts of techniques that can be used.
And it's important. It's really important, because what it does if you know this, and if you know that there's more, and I'm just going to say again, it's rooted in a personality, but there's also this cultural overlay. Just remember, you're leading two lives in some ways, and we call that, double switching. At home, you're one way, and then you go at work, you're another way. And if you talk to a lot of people, they're very tired of it. It's mentally draining. It's very mentally draining, right, to do that. And what it does also is it causes that incongruence in your mind. You're constantly, behaving like this, and it's draining for everybody involved. But here's the thing. What Andie's talking about is such a good point. If you know that this is happening, what do you do? It's the do that you want to focus on, right? One way to do it, Andie, is, and I've been doing in my meetings, everybody, okay, what do you have to say about this? What do you have to say about this? What do you have to say about this? And you can think, oh my gosh, how many people around the room are you going to go to? Well, maybe you need to curate your groups a little bit smaller, okay, initially, because it helps the person who doesn't say much have a chance then to articulate and say, okay, I get a chance now to say what I want to say, and it's a deliberate and it's intentional. I want to hear what you're saying, versus the loudest person always shutting down another
Everybody
person.
else.
Everybody else. And everybody's like, well, we're not going to say anything.
Can you both talk a little bit each about your areas, about how gender bias, say, affects the legal field, affects case law in the legal field?
Oh, yeah.
And I also definitely want to hear from Neelum about how gender bias affects healthcare
Oh, yeah.
and research that is done. So,
Okay, what we've already talked about covers a lot of it. And so let me just do a couple of things, which is to say that efforts are being done to change. The legal profession was male profession, a white male profession. And so to keep the intersectionality aspect in this as well. So what happened? It was not that long ago where Ruth Bader Ginsburg was second in her class and she couldn't get a law job because she was a woman. And even though she was second in her class, that didn't matter. And the same was true for Sandra Day O'Connor. And so what happened is Title IX did wonderful things for all of us. And one of the key things it did was that when I was 12, I decided I was going to be a lawyer. And my parents had one friend who was a lawyer, and he's going to give me career advice and spends the whole time telling me why I did not want to be a lawyer, because no one likes lady lawyers. And I will never have any friends. I will never have a family. I'll be lonely. Obviously I didn't pay any attention to him. But there's a lot of people who would have, but he was onto something. And so if it hadn't been for Title IX, they were only admitting 1%, 2%, 3% of a class as women. And because of Title IX, when I got to the age of law school, I was one of the first classes where they opened up and they were admitting women on the same basis. And that was really a dramatic change. And so more women at the starting end does not mean more women in the senior ranks. And so one of the things that my firm does is we make certain that you get evaluated on your core competencies, not on whether somebody can write, she's not a self-starter, or she doesn't fit the culture, or whatever. And so there are ways to disrupt bias that work in the legal profession that also work every place else. And information is important and training is important, but that's not going to do it. We have to disrupt the bias policies and procedures. And many of them are not in writing. They're just the way it happens. And so that's my answer to that.
thank you. And healthcare?
Well, healthcare, it's a huge topic. And if you kind of put things in like little buckets, so you can talk about healthcare as the actual clinical, when you're coming in and you're being seen, women utilize the healthcare system more than men. We've seen that in research. We've seen that in our numbers. Women frequent the doctors more. Women frequent their nurse practitioners, et cetera. And the question is, why is that? You want to know why is that? Is it a medical issue? Or is it that women are just more comfortable seeking help and guidance if they can access it, and men may not be? So there is this whole thing about, is it truly a sex difference, or is it more of a gender role to do that? But we also know that women come in the healthcare system later when it comes to medical conditions and issues. So therefore, and cardiac disease is one thing that I've learned so much from my mentor, Dr. Annabelle Volkman, who really educated me. Now, again, I am a physician, but I did not know the extent of the sex differences in heart disease as much as I learned from her, working closely with her at the Heart Center for Women, et cetera, where we learned that women present with heart attacks differently than men. Okay, so there's a sex difference here now in the presentation. And we're also now learning in medicine that there are differences anatomically and biologically, and it is not just that maybe women have different symptoms. So I want everyone to realize that there are sex differences that occur. women are not little men. We say this all the time when it comes to medicine. Yet in medicine, we treat women like little men.
Well, so many of the research is done only on men.
Well, that's the whole thing. It used
So-
to be the 75 kg white male was the gold standard if you did the research based on the 75 kilogram white male. So now we're saying no. We now have to open this up, and it's not just humans, it's also cells in a structure. Every cell has a sex. How many times even in research, when they'd say, I'm working on cells, what cell is it? Is it a female cell? Male cell? Oh, labs. We would always use male rats and mice. Why? I mean, it's permeating all the way through. And so for medicine, we have a lot to be talking about to make this no. If you're only going to do something in a male or a male rat, explain why. Justify it. So now on the grants, we have to justify. So thankfully on the NIH grants, we have to justify why it's there. The researcher has to state that. But if I just want to take it one step further, let's talk about medications. Medications, again, this is where women are not little men. Well, if you give this dose to dad and mom needs the same medication, maybe cutting it in half because you're smaller and you don't need that full dose. We hear it all the time. People do it all the time. We would like to see different dosing for men and women. Really come out dosing and
knowing what they're doing.
Exactly. Knowing, right. But
Imagine that.
Can you imagine? But you think about medicine. So you're giving the same dose and you're saying, okay, well, you're a man. It doesn't make a difference. And we know that that's not true. So these are the things we're really promoting in medicine. I'm telling you, we're moving forward in here. We have now sex and gender courses in medicine where it's just talking about more the biological. And we need to start promoting that even in now. I'm talking about it to the students. There are sex differences. And if they are, why are they there? If they're not, that's fine too. But start looking at that all the way through.
Thank you. I think we have just less than 5 minutes and we want to allow enough time for questions. But a final question from me for both of you. We have a lot of students in the room. What advice would you give for students who are just starting out, trying to figure out their way in the world in terms of gender bias?
Don't take it personal. And having a sense of humor goes a long way. And
it's healthy for you. It's good to laugh.
It really is.
So, it's good to laugh.
So plus you need people to talk to. I'm always available. So
Thank you.
Yeah, so ditto what Andie said. I think this thing about don't take it personal is really important. You have to be an observer. You have to be astute to look at what's happening. And then you have to think about, okay, now that I see what's happening, what can I do to, again, minimize that right now? Because if you minimize it, you can make the change. Okay, and speak up about it. As with Andie, I'm available also to talk about this because it's a really important thing. The more you talk about it, the more comfortable you are discussing this topic. And also then you paying it forward, sharing it with someone else who may not understand or even realize this is occurring. You have to pay it forward.
And if you're really angry and you have a legitimate reason to be really angry, don't go off on the spot.
Yeah.
Take the time to step back and think about, because in many situations, the first reaction is to be angry and outraged, and that's the right reaction. But you want to then be able to present what is wrong with the situation in a straightforward and direct and calm way. And that's very hard for us to do, and that requires practice.
I assume this advice applies to men and to women.
Yes,
absolutely.
clearly,
Everybody.
clearly.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
And the
Gender
only
neutral.
last
Great.
point with Neelum talking about the differences between men and women from biological and the social standpoint. When it comes to ambition and talent and whatnot, women and men are the same. And that I want to make that point to make it clear, because historically it was that the norm and the standard was male and masculine, and that was what everybody was judged against. Actually, white male was what it was judged against. And the reality is that that's not the case, But women, the studies all show women are just as ambitious. They care about their careers as much. And so don't let anybody tell you that somehow there's something wrong with you if you're ambitious, because you're supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. Good words. There you go.
On that very positive note, we'll
Yeah.
we'll open it up for questions. We'll take turns. Go ahead.
Yes.
So, ladies, I found this very interesting. It's good to hear from you on what you expressed about the job world for females. As I told your moderator yesterday, I've been a plaintiff in 2 Title IX cases. I've experienced a lot of ugly and nasty situations because of that. And I want to know what you're doing at the present to help inner city girls from schools such as Fenger, Farragut, Clementi, Hyde Park, and I could go on in CPS. Instead of bringing female students at the high school level to your firm or to your hospital who are from private Catholic charter schools or suburban schools, what are you doing to help inner city schools and the female students who do not get exposed to the professional world?
That's a great question. Yeah. And there are a number of programs and mentorship programs to try to help these, whether it's through the STEM area or not. But what you're highlighting is that enough is not being done, and that we all have an obligation to make our city and our communities better. And that is something that every person in this room can be part of. And very often what these girls need, these young girls need, is they just need somebody to be a role model, somebody to talk to them, somebody to read with them. And there are programs, and every one of them is desperate for more mentors. And so I would urge everybody to seriously consider, in whatever community you're in, to be part of those sorts of programs.
So I think thinking about your question, and it's a very good one, there's 2 things that just right now personally that I've been involved with that have been very, very gratifying. The first is the Center for Healthcare Innovation. We put together a sex and gender summer internship that talked about what I was telling you about, the medical differences that we see in sex and gender medicine. And we specifically went to what you're saying, the schools that are not represented a lot of times in these STEM fields. And by the way, STEM, S-T-E-M-M, the extra medicine, okay? And when I get really clever, I put an A in there, and S-T-E-A-M-M, because I bring in the arts. That is really a complete package, but we did this, and we had the students come through there for access to understand these concepts already so that they can start to dream and let them start to imagine what it could be, saying that it could be you, right? And then the other program that just finished was the American Heart Association.
Right.
We had the Go Red program, the STEM program, and Dr. Vogtman and I have been doing that for many years. And that was specifically looking at schools and high schools, again, underrepresented in these programs, to come and learn through STEM. So we're bringing in a lot of the students through the STEM fields to also show them what is possible. And then say, okay, now that you've seen that, would you like to be mentored? And I think that's the thing we have to keep bringing people in to see what's out there that they can do.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we have another question here from a student.
Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm so happy that you were able to come here and talk to all of us. And this topic really stood out to me, just because I not only a woman, but also a person with another minority, not only of color, but also a person who is in that disability minority. So, so it's very interesting because I can connect all these ideas to the biases that people often with disabilities face from others. And so I just wanted to say this has really been really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? There are folks approaching the microphone.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk today. A couple of questions. So the bias you faced when you were starting out was obviously even more than it is today. So I'm curious, you're both at the top of your fields, very competitive fields. How did you navigate that back when you were starting out? And I'm also curious how you figured out how to kind of be as individuals, in the sense that there are a lot of gendered norms in the workplace in terms of if you're a woman and you're seen as too tough, that's criticized. And if you're seen as too soft, that's criticized. So I think it's very hard to kind of figure out how to be yourself in a way that works professionally. So I'm curious how you figured that out as well.
Well, I'll start it because that's the read my book. What happens is the stereotypes that are associated with men are called agentic stereotypes.
Right.
And those that are associated with women are communal. And so what happens is the people who succeed, women who succeed in their careers, are women who can dip into the communal when they need it, but also do the agentic when they need it. And the studies show that women who can do both actually do better than everybody else. And so I would suggest that Neelum and I both are both agentic and communal as part of it.
But, Andie, just thinking about that, what do you think your split is? So, is it a 50-50 split? Is it a 60-40, 80-20? What do you think?
I think that it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
It's really contextual.
Yep.
And I have probably a lot of people who think that I'm the nicest person in the world. And I know some people who think that I'm like a monster. I don't see myself that way, but so
It's
it really contextual. And, you're not balancing that right if you have small children at home who tell you to not do your lawyer or doctor voice.
Exactly.
So-
Right. Exactly. I think, it's a great question. And I think what Andie's saying is right. You're dipping in both, but then in the end, at the end of the day, it's you. Everywhere you go, there you are. Right.
Right.
And you probably heard that. And I think it's so good because in the end, you're going to figure out what percentage is just you at resting state, if you will. And then you're going to have to do maybe a little bit of a switch in a situation. But again, being intentional about it helps. So you don't feel like you're an imposter on anything, right? And I think that's important. The other thing I can tell you when you ask me, like navigating through over my career, I have my antenna up when I see things happening. I make it very intentional. If I do ask, and I make why I'm asking. We don't do that enough. We just ask. And I say that even in medicine to the residents and the medical students, tell the person why you're asking the question, especially about medical history. Why are you asking me that? Just to ask? No. Why? And so you want to be the same thing when you're going to say something to someone. I'm asking you this, or I want to know this because I'm thinking about that. That, again, helps you clarify your intentionality of how you're going to move things through. And it helps the other person on the receiving end say, oh, that's why she's asking me. So she's asking me that because she may want to help out in that situation. And we don't do enough of it. And I think that's across everything. We just ask. And no, that's not good enough. You have to say why you're asking.
Thank you. We have some more questions.
Hi, we have some people watching online. So this is from Jessica, who's watching on LinkedIn. And she said, it's estimated that due to the pandemic, gender parity has been pushed back 136 years, 99 years pre-pandemic. How can it's beyond my lifetime. How can I support my kids today so that they may see a day when parity is present? What would you imagine gender parity would actually look like?
Well, that actually is the topic of the third book I'm working on with my husband.
No kidding.
Seriously,
Seriously.
which is about what we need to do to change systemic bias, to make it, instead of the first two books are what women can do in biased workplaces.
Right.
And so it is worse for many women in the context of COVID and kids at home and not being in the office, so that you're not front of mind in getting the good assignments or being included in the important stuff. And so that's another one of those where you could get discouraged and say, it's impossible, I can't deal with it. And one of the tricks in trying to deal with situations like that is to think about small wins. So what can I do? And be pleased about a little win. And that's one of the things that would be so important in the school situation with the young kids coming up in the that don't have the resources. Just a small win can make all the difference. You could change a life. If you could change one life a day positively, then that's really a life well lived. And it's not so hard if you think about it. As to how you could do that. And so the pandemic is definitely hurt women, but they need to be sure that if they're only on Zoom, that they're being sure that they're part of the discussion, that they need to be reaching out to their supervisors or people that they work with so that they're not forgotten. And so there's a lot of tricks and techniques that can be done on a individual basis, but the systems need to change. And that's a very ambitious book at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, we did see the big pullback from obviously with COVID, and we saw this in medicine. We actually saw it in articles being submitted to journals, and we saw that more men were submitting articles to research journals than women. And, if you're a woman, you're like, well, yeah, of course, we knew what was happening, but it was a big surprise, like what's happening. I think with one thing I can tell you, COVID pushed us into using technology now in places that where you couldn't use it. Oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. Well, we did. And yeah, we did telemedicine and we did telehealth and we started doing hybrid calls and hybrid things. And I would like to see personally that keeps moving forward and keep going. I think there's a win there and I think there's a gain. Okay. On the other hand, if you're the manager or if you're someone who has some leadership roles, you also should be saying, no, we have a world out there that there's talent and want to say something. How do we bring people in? And it's on us. It's on us to say, our teams, our managers, whatever, we need to know what you're saying. What can you do from where you're at to contribute? Not that you physically have to be here. I think we have to keep pushing that because otherwise it takes us right back to all the barriers or why people aren't doing certain things and not attending meetings and et cetera. And that's not good for us. For all of us, it's not good for. But specifically women, it's not good for us. I think we need to really focus on what's worked, the hybrid models, and keep bringing people in through that.
And that's a culture point.
Absolutely.
It's got to come from the top.
Yeah.
And so whether you're in a business that has 4 people or 400,000 people, what people do what the senior people want them to do. And if the senior people say it but don't mean it, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. So it's a culture issue and systemic breaking through, disrupting the biases, so many biases that are out there.
Thank you. A question over here.
Hi, thank you very much for being here and Roosevelt for sponsoring this great event. I come from the K-12 education field, which is very different in many ways from the male-dominated professions of medicine and law and business, where we are, I think it's like 90, my percentages for this is going to be a little off, but something like 90% is female in the K-12 field of education, but men still make considerably more than women. And I was recently at a Women in K-12 educational leadership event where a speaker shared that men in education end up in the superintendency roles and things like that, and that's where the big income disparity takes place for the most part. But I learned, and this is really for all the young people here, that it turns out that I'd heard that men apply for and go for jobs that they are absolutely not qualified for or barely qualified for at this rate astoundingly more than women who don't apply for jobs that they're not qualified for or only kind of close to it and kind of wait. So I know that's a fear thing, a confidence thing, but what can we do to make that shift?
Well, part of it is we need to encourage each other to go for it.
Right.
Okay. And part of it is we very often are trained to not want to fail. Right. And so if you don't fail, you don't advance. And a perfect example of that was Michael Jordan. Was it Michael Jordan? Yeah, where he was in college. He was sort of thrown off the team, or high school was thrown off the team because he was a loser. And he went home and sat in his room and cried for a while, and then he went outside and he played basketball 12, 15 hours a day. And the guy, so part of it is resilience and willing to take a risk, and the other part of it is mindset. And these are in the first part of our book about conversations with yourself, which are that if you have a mindset which says, I'm a failure, or I can't do that because I'll fail, then you're never going to take the risk that you need. If I walked into that wall and dust myself off, and I'm resilient, and I say, well, I can get through there, and I walk through, go through the wall again, I have to be thinking about what's wrong with what I just did. I need a door. So I need to think about, it's not a failure if I walked into the wall. What it is something to think about. What am I going to do next? And so when you were starting with your statistic about K through 12, and you said that 90% or whatever the statistic is are women, my first reaction was, and what percentage of principals of K through 12 are women? And the answer to that is there's more men. So what's wrong with that picture? And so the women who are the teachers who are developing these skills need to be encouraged to make it clear that they would like to be in a management position.
Exactly. And I think the thing about when you were talking, it's this risk. The risk taking, and again, we've seen this, we hold back at times. Again, this is not everyone, but we hold back because we keep thinking about everything else that's depending on us. Why would we take that risk? Everybody depends on us, family, extended, whatever. And yet what happens when we do that, then those positions start to go to the wayside. It reminds me, Andie, the book I read years ago, Carly Fiorina. She was saying when she went over to Hewlett Packard, and there was a part in the book where she says she was talking to the engineers initially, and she had to get the term good enough to them because they were constantly tinkering and making it better and better and constantly making it perfect. And she had to come in with that term, it's good enough. Well, you're seeing it in the data saying that people are saying, oh, I have a good enough CV or resume, throw my name in there. And women are like, make it tinker, 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 make it more, more, more. And after a while, it's a diminishing return. It doesn't help you, right? It's like that trajectory goes up, and then after a while, it's not adding. It's the risk that's holding us back. And frankly, what Andie said, okay, you didn't get the job. So what? Next. No, seriously, so what? Learn from it. Next. It could be another position for you. And we have to start to ingrain that in there. Go out there, do it, learn from the mistake, and go.
And one last point about that, which is because, you see Neelum and me and you think, okay, there's these two. Well, when I was a summer lawyer, I didn't get a job offer. If you didn't get a job offer, there was something wrong. You either had 4 heads or you were a mass murderer. And I didn't get the job offer. And I was told that by the man who was in charge of the summer lawyers called me and said, I'm really sorry you don't have this, And I'm like, well, I got all these memos back saying, you're a rock star. And what was this about? And he said, well, Mr. So-and-so said that you would get a job over his dead body. And Mr. So-and-so had an office that was larger than this room, and I had done one 15-minute project for him. And so I thought that my career was over before it started. And so I say that not because I hope none of you ever have a situation like that, but the reality is that the world works in mysterious ways, and sometimes, depending on how we can react, can make all the difference in the world. I'm glad I didn't see the guy in an alley while I was driving. for many years, but it took me a while to understand that what happened was.
Spoken like a Chicagoan, right?
Yeah, what can I?
In the alley. Let's
I
take it
know
out in the alley.
I'm totally against violence, but I truly am. But the reality is that he said he needed a summer lawyer, and his assistant said, "Oh, well, there's John and Joe and Fred and Andy," and he says, "Okay, Andy." So I go to his office, and he's like, who is this person that's coming in, and he was sitting at his desk with his feet up and his hands behind his head, which is now I know is the classic, I am the super alpha cool guy, And I grew up where you shake hands with somebody the first time you meet them. I walked over to his desk to shake his hand without realizing that what that meant was that he had to stand up because it was impolite for him to be sitting down to shake my hand. Well, it turns out that was my interchange with him. And
that was it.
I just think that we have to keep in mind that we have to be conscious of what's happening with other people, but we own our own careers.
That's right.
And we own our own lives.
That's right.
And we can be the master of it. And that's really what the message is, notwithstanding all the downer stuff that you heard today.
The bumps in the road. On that positive note, we'll wrap it up. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you. We're very glad
Excellent
to be
stuff.
here.
Thank you.
Wow, what do I say? Dr. Aggarwal, Ms. Kramer, Dean McBride, Ms. Bolden, Ms. Rivera, thank you so much for the introductions, for running the panel, and for amazing, amazing discussion. We could have you here all day and all night, and we still have more to do. Allow me just for a second. First of all, let me thank Trustee Ann Ford. Ann, would you please stand up? Okay. And our other trustees as well. Yes. And Trustee Ford and Trustee Herczeg are responsible for the Women's Leadership Council, and we are their guests today. And also Vice President Barron. Nicole, would you stand up, please? We recognize, we have 9 vice presidents in our cabinet, 5 are women.
Okay, good job.
Good job.
We have 6 college deans, 3 are women.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, interesting, a little bit of work regarding the universities across the nation. About 20% of the university presidents are women. It's changing. It's getting more positive and positive. 10 years ago, it was probably 2 or 5 or
Right.
1%.
Yeah, right.
So we're seeing it in law firms. We're seeing it in medical schools. We're seeing it across the university. Now, good news, over 55 to 60% of the college students now in the U.S. are women. Okay, so that trend is changing. Here's the thing. I was in another university, private university, where we admitted women. The trustees had mandated that exact equal of men and women be admitted every year. And we would go to them and tell them, if we do blind admission, okay, 60% would be women because they're more qualified based on merit than men. They say, no. It has to be equal. And so fortunately, we don't do that here at Roosevelt University. Goes back to our legacy of Eleanor Roosevelt, actually, that said, this is the only college I know in, 1946, 47, that they don't admit based on sex, race, religion, ethnicity, and so forth. And she said more universities should do that. And here we are today with that legacy. Now, you mentioned Justice Ginsburg. She was here 3 years ago in front of 4,000 people in our auditorium theater. And the student asked her, Justice Ginsburg, how many women should we have on the Supreme Court? Within 2 seconds, she said, 9, of course. And that was the end of her talk.
Right, that was
You have heard her say that before. Now, you do have an invitation, both of you, to be here at the university on October 20th, 22, because Justice Sotomayor will be here.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
thank you.
As our keynote speaker. Now, we do have lunch for everybody outside, for the speakers as well. There's no special lunch. It's still same sandwich for everybody.
It's good.
Okay,
That's good.
we're good with the same sandwich.
But you
Not
know,
a problem.
also within the academy, we have come a long way. We have come a long way. Not enough. We're probably 50% there, 60% there, but there's significant work to be done on equality, on ranks, on gender, on salaries, and all kinds of mentoring and sponsoring, as you mentioned, that we need to do. So with that, I just want to thank you again for coming to Roosevelt University. Our doors are open to you anytime you come in with these kind of messages.
Thank you. For the invite. Thank you.